Going to continue now with more news making headlines at this hour. We know that the Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, includes upholding socioeconomic rights, and that is the right to food and water, social security, amongst others. And so this also relates to the cost of living. South Africans continue to feel the pinch, though, with the rise in the cost of living. It's due to various factors, both domestically and abroad. And so navigating this during such unprecedented times really puts continuous strain on the most vulnerable, a nation that experiences unemployment rates of 31.9%. And since the formation of the Government of National Unity, the unemployment levels have dropped from 32.1%. The social relief of distress grant, of course, has also been extended, amongst other measures. But we're really looking at what does this mean for South Africans at large, navigating these multiple crises, particularly as we observe Freedom Month. So Anneline van der Poel, Chief Legal Officer at Debt Rescue South Africa, joins us to weigh in further. Anneline, good morning, and thank you for making time to chat with us here today.
Good morning, Liesl. Thank you so much for having me.
The challenges that are facing, that South Africa is facing, is multifaceted, and the daily survival, it's really perpetuated by this increasing economic challenges, and that's affecting the business supply value chain as well. Perhaps you could just paint that picture, talk to the economic realities on the ground for ordinary South Africans.
Well, unfortunately it's bleak. We did a survey recently at Debt Rescue to just get an idea of what are consumers going through, particularly looking at the effect of the electricity price hike that's just come in. And it's been absolutely shocking to see the choices that consumers are having to make. People are cutting back on essentials like food and transport so they can keep the lights on. So, and this was before the electricity hike had even kicked in. So now you're adding another 12.7% tariff hike. We've got a cost of living crisis. We still have that hangover that we're stuck with, and unemployment, as you've mentioned. So disposable income is shrinking, and realistically, it's really crushing household finances.
And there's obviously continuous talks about the VAT increase. Issues that's still being resolved, and messages are reaching consumers. We're looking at South Africa's debt levels as well, and perhaps how this is also going to be exacerbated given whatever possibility and probabilities arise from the VAT conundrum. How dire is the situation?
Terrible. It's really terrible because it hits everybody. There's nobody who's being exempted from this, and that's the harsh reality with the VAT increase. We saw this in 2018 as well. Nobody gets spared. The basket of excluded goods are so small, and unfortunately, the reality is we need to increase that basket to start off with. But everything is going to cost 0.5%, higher. But the reality of it's actually that it's 3%. If you look at taking the current 15 to 15.5, for example, is actually a 3% increase in VAT. So this means we're going to see food prices are going to go up. We already have seen now the electricity price go up. And every single thing that we purchase, well, virtually every single thing that we purchase is going to cost us more. So many consumers are already struggling to survive, and now we're making everything that we purchase, including food, more expensive.
Yes, and obviously compromising on the nutritional value. And again, to your point about opportunity costs, what needs to be foregone or what they have to forego, of course, to meet some of the other demands and strains. Also, just back to your earlier point about the electricity tariffs that are kicking in. I mean, that's also going to have an impact. We've seen load shedding and the impact of the electricity crisis leading up into this. And given the reality that you've also spoken to, I mean, how is this exacerbating the crisis? Because even just the methodology itself, whether it's flexible enough at this point to accommodate poor South Africans, especially during these challenging economic times. These are some of the questions that are being posed. How would you weigh in?
Well, the reality is we understand that Eskom is under immense pressure to try and get the infrastructure back up and running so that we can prevent load shedding, because obviously that has massive, devastating impacts on the economy. But the reality is that the average consumer is the one who's bearing the brunt in having to try and find solutions and ultimately pay for this. And, we've seen cases of the fixed fee on home power tariff has gone up by nearly 90%. And low-income households are now facing up to 20% increase for using under 600 units because there's a penalty attached to that. So there's a lot that needs to be taken into account, and we definitely need a fairer distribution, and we have to factor in how this affects South Africans ultimately. I mean, when people have to start foregoing food, when they have to, really start looking at investing in other, methods, for example, gas or whatever, those are cash layouts people don't have. Solar is incredibly expensive. And South Africans are left with very little options at this point. And it's just really putting them in a case where it's getting worse and more difficult for them.
Because there's also the stretching of the social relief of distress grant, rather. But beyond that, obviously now looking at talks of better access to this, or the implementation of the possible, universal basic income grant that's more aligned to inflation prices regarding food, even just the poverty line, because so many are affected. What conversations need to be had on that front?
Well, there's a lot of conversations that need to be had. I mean, I think the most important right now that we have to focus on is the fact that we need to address unemployment. That's the long and the short of it, is as long as we sit with unemployment rates as high as they currently are. And we have to also look at the distribution of where this the employment that is actually there is sitting. If we don't have South Africans employed, it means that there is no revenue for government, ultimately. There's no spending power, which means the economy is not growing. And in contrast, it's actually, it might not be contracting, but the rate at which it's growing is very, very slow. So we need to look at things like this grey listing. We need to address that so that we can get off of that, so that we can ultimately have more investment back into this country, and thereby, empowering businesses to grow and ultimately employ more people. It's sustainable employment, proper employment is what this country needs, so that we can stimulate the economy and obviously, most importantly, is get sustainable solutions for households who are unfortunately having to live on these grants, which are not nearly enough to actually assist them in reality.
Because these are the domestic challenges that we're facing. And whilst we're navigating that, I mean, that is a conundrum on its own. Government has that commitment to obviously raise revenue to deliver on its constitutional obligations, but the context is also occurring, it's not occurring in isolation. There's a global outlook as well. It's also uncertain. It's also unpredictable at this time. Trade-offs are definitely needed. So perhaps you could also explain the macro factors. Global inflation, we're looking at exchange rate issues as well. We saw the fluctuations there. Tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, I don't know if we have time to speak about climate change as well, even just the lingering effects of COVID-19.
Indeed, and I think that's the whole thing is that nothing is happening in isolation. It's not one element, it's multiple elements. So if we look at, obviously globally, there's been, there's always the saying that if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And if America, starts, for example, what we've seen in this past week and a half, the tariff increases, etc., the massive worldwide effect it had on trade markets, and unfortunately then we have to look at the additional impact of our domestic situation as well. Currently the rand is trading at about 19 rand 30 to the US dollar. It was 18 rand 31 on the last day of March, so this is a 4.5% decline in a question of 2 weeks. And we're a country who is heavily reliant on imports, which means that everything that's landing here now is costing a lot more because of these instabilities. But the reality is there are a lot of things we have absolutely no control over. The macroeconomic factors, global instability. We've got two wars going on at the moment, at least 2 wars going on at the moment, and all of them ultimately affect global markets and us as a developing economy. As we're classified, are ultimately usually the ones who get affected the worst.
Yeah, I need to wrap up. And so in conclusion, obviously now we're Freedom Month, commemorations are ensuing. The question is, who bears the burden of this reform? It's clear that leadership is needed as well. And so we're looking at our current dynamics, just what needs to be topping the agenda as well, ironing out some of the deficiencies, systemically, even just corruption at large. How would you weigh in on that social compact so that democracy reigns and that the promises are upheld for the rights of all citizens?
Well, I think we really need to address, for example, the items like you've mentioned. We need to make sure that there's no corruption and that gets tackled as quickly as possible. We need to build faith in our country where investors look to us and go, this is a place we want to invest. We feel stable. This is, but there's no anomalies that could cause massive risk to them. And this goes back to the grey listing conversation, for example. So there's a lot that needs to happen. Unfortunately, beyond most, us ordinary South Africans' control, there's very little many of us can do about that. But and we need to look at job creation. There's a lot that needs to happen, and there's a lot of pressure, and unfortunately, it's going to take time. But I do believe there's hope, and it's going to take some serious commitment to actually get us out of this.
Okay, well, obviously the clock is ticking, and we're watching how those dynamics unfold. Let's leave our conversation there for now. Anneline, thank you for your time. Really just weighing in, of course, this Freedom Month. We were exploring the rise in the cost of living due to micro and macro factors. Anneline van der Poel, of course, Chief Legal Officer at Debt Rescue South Africa, weighing in. Perhaps also looking at the impact that it's having on the most vulnerable as well. Thank you to her for joining us. Let's leave that conversation there. We'll take a quick ad break. Upon our